I was there. I need to tell you what John said before he died, New York City. December 8th, 1980. The Dakota Building. Its imposing silhouette, usually a symbol of old-world elegance, now cast a long, cold shadow over Central Park. For me, Sarah, a young, aspiring journalist, it was a pilgrimage. I wasn't there for an interview, not officially. I was there because John Lennon was there, and for a generation, he was a beacon, a voice, a dream. I'd spent the day hovering near the Dakota, hoping for a glimpse, a quote, anything that would connect me to the man whose music had shaped my world. I wasn't a rabid fan, but a quiet observer, drawn by an almost spiritual pull. Earlier, I'd seen him, John Lennon. He'd signed an album for a man, a quiet, unassuming figure who had been waiting patiently. I remembered thinking how accessible he seemed, how human, despite the legend. The day had been vibrant for him. A photo shoot with Annie Leibovitz, a radio interview where he spoke with a renewed sense of purpose, a recording session with Yoko. He was back. He was happy. He was creating. As dusk settled, I found myself drawn back to the Dakota. A chill wind whipped through the streets, carrying the scent of winter and the distant hum of the city. I stood across the street, watching the entrance, a silent sentinel in the encroaching darkness. Then the limousine pulled up, John and Yoko, returning from the studio. The day's work, the promise of new music, clutched in his hand. He stepped out first, a familiar figure, even from a distance. Yoko followed. They walked towards the archway, towards the sanctuary of their home. I felt a surge of quiet excitement. Another day, another glimpse, a memory to hold on to. But then, the shadow moved. A figure detached itself from the archway. The man from earlier, the one with the album. I saw him raise his arm. I heard the shots. 5 sharp cracks that tore through the New York night, shattering the silence, shattering everything. My mind couldn't process it. It was a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. John stumbled. He cried out. Yoko screamed, and then he fell. I was there. I saw it. And in the chaos that followed, in the desperate moments before the sirens, before the world knew, I heard something. A whisper, a final utterance, a message from John Lennon before he died. And I need to tell you what he said. My connection to John Lennon wasn't unique. Millions felt it. But for me, in growing up in a fractured home in the suburbs of New York, his music was a lifeline. His songs were the soundtrack to my awakening. Imagine taught me to dream beyond the mundane. Give Peace a Chance ignited a nascent sense of activism. His raw honesty in Plastic Ono Band resonated with my own unspoken angers and confusions. I wasn't a Beatlemaniac screaming at concerts. I was a quiet devotee, absorbing his words, his melodies, his defiant spirit. He was the voice that told me it was okay to question, to rebel, to seek truth. By 1980, I was a journalism student, hungry to tell stories that mattered. John Lennon, after his 5-year hiatus, had returned with Double Fantasy, an album that spoke of domestic bliss, mature love, and a renewed sense of hope. It felt like a personal triumph, a testament to resilience. I followed his interviews, read every article. He spoke of his love for Yoko, his joy in raising Sean, his belief in the power of ordinary life. He was still the rebel, but a rebel who had found peace. I remember his RKO radio interview from that very day. He spoke with such clarity, such warmth. I consider that my work won't be finished until I'm dead and buried, he'd said. The words, chilling in retrospect, had then felt like a promise of endless creation. I wanted to be a journalist who captured that kind of truth, the human truth, the raw, unvarnished reality of people's lives. And John Lennon, in his vulnerability and his strength, embodied that truth. That day, December 8th, I felt an inexplicable pull to the Dakota. It wasn't a planned assignment. It was an instinct, a feeling that something significant was in the air. I carried my small notebook, my pen, my youthful idealism. I was ready to witness history, to capture a moment, to write a story that would resonate. I just never imagined the story would be this. I never imagined that the man who had given me so much, who had taught me to find my voice, would have his own silenced in front of my eyes. And I never imagined that his final words would be etched into my memory, a burden and a sacred trust. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, and leave that powerful, like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. The shots, 5 of them. They ripped through the night, through the fabric of reality. John stumbled, a grotesque dance of pain and disbelief. Yoko's scream, a primal sound that tore through the air, is a sound I will carry to my grave. He fell. Not gracefully, not like a hero in a film. He fell hard, awkwardly, a man suddenly robbed of his life force. I was frozen. My mind, trained to observe, to record, simply shut down. It was too much, too real. The man, Chapman, stood there, calm, almost serene, the gun still in his hand. He didn't run, he didn't hide. He just stood, a chilling tableau of cold, calculated evil. Yoko was on her knees, cradling John, her cries echoing off the Dakota's stone walls. A doorman, Jose Perdomo, rushed out, his face a mask of horror. He kicked the gun away from Chapman. "Do you know what you've done?" Perdomo screamed at Chapman. Chapman, in a voice devoid of emotion, replied, "I just shot John Lennon." But before the doorman, before the police, before the world descended into chaos, I was closer. I was just across the street, the sounds, the images searing themselves into my consciousness. And in those agonizing seconds, as John lay bleeding, as Yoko desperately tried to hold him, I heard it. A whisper, a gasp, his last words. He looked at Yoko, his eyes wide with a pain that was both physical and something deeper, something about betrayal, yes, about the senselessness of it all. And he said, his voice barely audible, a ragged breath escaping his lips, "Yoko, I'm shot." Simple, direct, utterly devastating. Not a grand philosophical statement, not a final plea for peace. Just the raw, terrifying truth of a man realizing his life was ending. "Yoko, I'm shot." The words hung in the air, swallowed by the sirens that were now wailing in the distance, growing louder, closer. The world was about to learn. But I had heard his final, heartbreaking truth, and it changed everything. The sirens arrived, a cacophony of sound that ripped through the stunned silence. Police cars, their lights flashing, converged on the Dakota. Officers, their faces grim, swarmed the scene. Yoko was still on the ground, holding John, her screams now turning into guttural sobs. The doorman, Perdomo, was pointing at Chapman, who stood motionless, a book in his hand, waiting to be arrested. I watched, numb, as paramedics rushed to John. They worked quickly, desperately, but I knew. I had seen the blood. I had heard his words. They lifted him onto a stretcher, rushing him into a police car, not an ambulance. It was a desperate attempt to get him to Roosevelt Hospital as quickly as possible. Yoko was bundled into the back seat with him. The scene became a maelstrom of flashing lights, shouting voices, and the growing realization that something truly horrific had just happened. Reporters, drawn by the sirens, began to arrive, their cameras flashing, their questions sharp and intrusive. I stood there, a ghost in the crowd, my notebook still clutched in my hand, but unable to write a single word. My journalistic instincts, usually so keen, were completely overwhelmed by the sheer, brutal reality of what I had witnessed. I heard snippets of conversation. John Lennon shot. Outside the Dakota. Dead? The rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by the frantic energy of the city. I walked away, my legs feeling like lead, the image of John falling, the sound of the shots, Yoko's scream, and his final whispered words playing on an endless loop in my mind. I found myself at a payphone, my hands shaking as I dialed my editor. "It's Sarah," I managed to say, my voice hoarse. "John Lennon, he's been shot." I was there. My editor, usually calm and collected, was stunned. "Are you sure, Sarah? How bad is it?" He's gone," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. I heard him. He said, "Yoko, I'm shot." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, my editor's voice, grim and urgent. "Get to Roosevelt Hospital, Sarah. Now. And call me with everything." But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to breathe. I needed to process. I needed to escape the horror that had just unfolded. The world was about to learn of John Lennon's death. But for me, it had already happened. I had been there. I had heard his final words. And the weight of that knowledge was almost unbearable. The news hit like a tidal wave. John Lennon shot dead. The words flashed across television screens, blared from radios, screamed from newspaper headlines. The world stopped. For a generation, it was a collective punch to the gut, a moment frozen in time. Everyone remembered where they were, what they were doing, when they heard the news, and I was at a small diner trying to make sense of it all, when the television above the counter flashed the breaking news. The faces of the people around me, once absorbed in their own lives, turned to masks of shock and disbelief. The grief was immediate, raw, and universal. Across New York, across America, across the entire world, people reacted with stunned silence, then with an outpouring of raw, visceral grief. Radio stations played John Lennon's music on repeat. Television channels broke into regular programming with special reports. The phone lines jammed. In Liverpool, his hometown, the news was met with a profound sense of loss and betrayal. The boy who had left to conquer the world had been taken too soon, too violently. Fans gathered spontaneously. Outside the Dakota, a vigil began to form. Candles were lit. And flowers were laid. People stood in stunned silence, holding hands, crying, singing his songs. The image of John Lennon, the dreamer, the peace activist, being gunned down outside his home was a brutal contradiction. It felt like an attack on hope itself. Paul McCartney, reached by reporters, struggled for words. "It's a drag, isn't it?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. The casualness of the phrase belied the depth of his pain. George Harrison and Ringo Starr were equally devastated, issuing statements of profound sorrow. The Beatles, once an unbreakable unit, were now forever fractured. The world struggled to comprehend the senselessness of the act. Why John Lennon? Why the man who preached peace and love? Mark Chapman, the killer, remained at the scene, calm, almost serene. He was arrested without incident. His motive a twisted tapestry of delusion and envy. He wanted to steal Lennon's fame, to become somebody by destroying somebody. The immediate aftermath was a blur of grief, anger, and confusion. But beneath the surface, a deeper realization began to set in. John Lennon was gone. His physical presence, his voice, his creative spark, but his message, his music, his spirit, those would live on. They would become even more powerful in his absence. The world had stopped for a moment, but in that silence, the echoes of John Lennon's dreams began to resonate louder than ever before. The end had come, but the legacy was just beginning. In the days and weeks that followed, I wrote my story. Not just the facts, but the raw, emotional truth of what I had witnessed. I included his last words. "Yoko, I'm shot." My editor, a seasoned veteran, she's questioned it. "Sarah, are you absolutely sure? No one else reported that. It's a huge claim." "I heard it," I insisted, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. "I was there. I was close enough. It was clear." The newspaper published my account. It was met with a mix of awe and skepticism. Some praised my courage, my vivid reporting. Others accused me of sensationalism, of fabricating a dramatic last utterance. The official police reports, the hospital statements, they all focused on the medical facts, the time of death, the nature of the wounds. They didn't record final words. Yoko Ono, in her profound grief, never publicly confirmed or denied John's last words. Her focus was on his life, his legacy, not the brutal details of his death. The burden of that truth weighed heavily on me. I had seen something, I had heard something, and I had reported it, but without corroboration, it remained my truth, a solitary testimony against the official narrative. I continued my career in journalism, driven by a deeper sense of purpose. I sought out stories of injustice, of human resilience, of voices that needed to be heard. John Lennon's spirit, his unwavering belief in truth, guided me. But the memory of that night, the image of him falling, Yoko's scream, and his final, whispered words, never left me. It was a constant reminder of the fragility of life, the power of a single moment, and the profound responsibility of bearing witness. I learned that sometimes the most important truths are the ones that are hardest to prove, the ones that live in the hearts and minds of those who were there. John Lennon was gone, but his final words, his simple and devastating, became a part of my own story, a secret I carried, a truth I had to tell. New York City, decades later. The Dakota Building still stands, a landmark, a home, and a permanent reminder of the tragedy that unfolded beneath its archway. Strawberry Fields, a memorial garden in Central Park, now serves as a place of pilgrimage for fans from around the globe, a tranquil space dedicated to peace. Mark Chapman remains in prison, his twisted motivations forever etched into the narrative of that night. Yoko Ono, with remarkable resilience, became the guardian of John's legacy, ensuring his music and his message continued to reach the world. She raised Sean, a living testament to the love that had defined John's later years. My own career as a journalist flourished. I told countless stories, exposed injustices. No one gave voice to the voiceless. But the story of John Lennon's final moments and his last words remained a deeply personal, almost sacred memory. I never stopped believing what I heard. "Yoko, I'm shot." It wasn't a heroic last stand. It wasn't a poetic farewell. It was the raw, human cry of a man in pain. A man who, in his final breath, reached out to the woman he loved. and in its simplicity, it was profoundly powerful. It spoke to the vulnerability of even the greatest icons, the brutal reality of violence, and the enduring strength of human connection. The final moments of John Lennon were not the end of his story. They were the catalyst for its eternal beginning. His music, his words, his spirit. They continue to inspire, to challenge, to comfort. They remind us that peace is a constant struggle, that love is the ultimate answer, and that even in the face of senseless violence, hope can endure. I was there. I saw it. I heard it. And I needed to tell you what John said before he died. Not because it was sensational, but because it was true, because it was human, and because even in that final, heartbreaking whisper, there was a profound echo of the man who had always dared to speak his truth. The bullet holes in the Dakota's archway were repaired long ago. The blood washed away, but the scar remains, a permanent mark on the heart of a city and on the soul of a generation. And the whisper of John Lennon's last words, though unconfirmed by history, lives on, a haunting echo reminding us of the man, the moment, and the truth. The end. If this story about bearing witness, the weight of truth, and the enduring legacy of John Lennon moved you, subscribe and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that even in the darkest moments, human connection and truth can resonate. What historical event made you realize the profound impact of a single moment? Tell us in the comments below.